Hi, good afternoon. My name is Melissa Gerson. Welcome to Meet and Eat Together. I'm here today with my guest, Johanna Kandel, who is the founder and CEO of the Alliance for Eating Disorders Awareness. She's also an author of a book called Life Beyond Your Eating Disorder. And we're going to talk today about her experience, what brought her to this field, and then we're also going to learn some skills. So in order to get everybody oriented to the structure today, first, I want to let you know that we are going to be participating together in a therapeutic meal. It will replicate the structure of a therapeutic meal in a treatment setting for the most part. This is a great time if you have any friends who might be interested or who might benefit from the conversation today. This is a great time to invite some friends and tag some others so that we can be sharing this information with as many people as we can. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to start by checking in about our meal, the meal component. And so this is a part of every meal support therapy session. Most of the outpatient meal support sessions that we do, we ask our clients to actually bring a meal to the session. That gives them the opportunity to practice portioning, plating their food, selecting their foods, and get more and more comfortable over time in putting together a balanced meal. In an inpatient setting or a residential setting, and in some day treatment program settings, the food is actually served, it's prepared on site, and it's served. In this context, obviously, we're not doing that, but also we're trying to use this as an opportunity to really sharpen some of our skills around portioning and plating food, which is definitely a hard thing for people who are working through eating disorder recovery. So I'm going to start with my meal. I am running out of food in the house. Right now is an unusual time where we're all having sort of limited access to food, which is very, very triggering for many people who struggle. And I really identified with that struggle today because I was kind of pulling things out of the freezer, and I made peanut butter and jelly, which is something I had the other day. I kind of wanted to do more variety than that, but I have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich with a side of banana and a glass of milk. So I'm going to share a bit about how I put this meal together. So the only bread that we had in the house was brioche bread, which I like, so that's really good. In order to portion out the peanut butter, usually we don't advise measuring food, but trying to get a little bit more comfortable with eyeballing your food. And so a nice strategy for coating toast with peanut butter is that you take enough peanut butter so you cover the full bread and so that you don't see any more of the bread underneath. If you've done that, it means you probably have a nice adequate amount of peanut butter on your sandwich. So I did the peanut butter and jelly. I decided to do banana as my side because it's less crunchy than the apple I had the other day, and I don't want to be crunching while we're talking. And then I added a glass of milk because for me, I think banana, peanut butter, milk go really well together. And I felt like I needed a little bit more, I guess, density to my meal, because just having the sandwich and the banana alone felt like I might still be a little bit hungry. Johanna, can you share with us a bit about your meal?
Sure. So tonight is the start of Passover, so like obviously a holiday that I celebrate. So my intention this morning was how much bread can I get in my meals and breakfast and lunch, because I know how much I miss it during the holiday. And I have to also share that I'm also in a place in my recovery that I can actually participate in Passover. There was a very long time where I didn't, because I felt it to be very triggering for me in my recovery. So with that being said, so I don't know, I'm going to do that.
Exactly. Perfect.
So I did a turkey and brie sandwich with some chips. And I definitely fall in the same category as you, that like fresh produce is it's very limited in my house right now. But I'm a huge fan of brie. My heritage is French. So, there's never a moment in my house that there's not brie cheese. And so for me, I love the combination of turkey and brie together, and then adding that crunch with my sandwich. And then I actually have an apple for after the after the broadcast, because it would just get way too messy and way too crunchy. So that's what I chose to have. And I also, I'm very much looking forward to this. And thank you so much for having me on.
So nice to have you on. So folks, I also have I just want to let you know that I have a chat open. So if throughout this hour, if you have questions, feel free, or comments, whatever you want to share. I'm going to do my best to really be multitasking. I'm going to eat, I'm going to talk, I'm going to watch for the chats. So, please, I encourage you to send us questions or comments. So after we check in around meal components, sometimes we also check in about how we're feeling. So it's a nice opportunity to recognize if there's some anxiety going into the meal, if there's apprehension, if you feel calm, whatever it is, just take a moment to just notice it, and then bring your attention back to the dialogue so we can, because we want to be effective. We want to be effective in being able to complete a balanced meal together. So if we spend too much time focusing on any kind of uncomfortable feelings in ourselves, that could get in the way of doing what we know is important for our health. So the next thing we'll do is we set an intention for the meal. And for those of you who have listened before, and we run this meal almost every day now. We have, maybe 4 or 5 days a week, we're running the 1 o'clock meal. So some of you may be familiar with the idea of setting an intention, but that's just an opportunity to think about how you want to go into the meal. If there's something you want to practice in the meal, if there's something in particular you want to think about, if there's a skill that you want to work on. And so today, because after the meal and after we speak to Johanna, I'm going to teach a little bit about some breathing techniques. But I'm going to suggest as an intention today, if you don't have anything else on your mind for something you want to be thinking about during the meal, it might be a good idea just to kind of be aware of your breath and be aware that you're having steady breath, be aware of the pace of your breath, notice if it changes at all throughout the meal. And when in doubt, if you're feeling anxious, it's always helpful to try to slow down the breath. And again, after the meal, I'm going to teach a little skill in relation to breathing. So now that we've set our intention, we've checked in, and we've really confirmed that we have balanced meals in front of us. Balanced meal meaning that there's protein, there's carbohydrate, there's adequate fat. There can be fruit and vegetable as well. Now we can begin to chat. So I'm going to start eating. Johanna, you'll do the best you can to eat.
Sure.
One other thing I forgot to mention, I set a timer just so that we have a sense of our completion rate. So the idea with our lunch meal is that we want to try to eat the meal within 30 minutes. So, and many people struggle with pacing. So I'm setting a 15-minute timer. I'll let you know when we're at 15 minutes. That means we have another 15 minutes to try to kind of complete the lunch portion. And I'll give you a 5-minute notice when we're kind of almost done with the lunch portion. So you'll hear a little beep. Johanna, it may interrupt us a little bit. I'm just going to let everybody know halfway through. So Johanna, you've dedicated your life now to working in the field of eating disorders. And so my most obvious question is, can you share with us what got you there?
Sure, absolutely. First and foremost, I really want to thank you for doing this. I know that especially right now where we are physically distancing and not having that one-on-one connection, I've heard from so many people that are really having a much harder time just navigating the uncertainty, the anxiety, all of that. And I really love the fact that, you've stepped up, you've created this platform for people to eat together, which can be very difficult for a lot of our community. So thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for inviting me on. My story started, I guess to really start it off, I have to go back to my parents. My father, always, but so my father was actually a Holocaust survivor. So there's a lot of transgenerational trauma in my family. And we know now that, there's so much research, empirical data about, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of Holocaust survivors have an increased rate of, depression, anxiety, eating disorder, substance use. So I really bring that always to the table because his story was so much a part of my story. But my parents actually emigrated from France. My father came right after the war. My mother came once they got married. They moved to New York. Um, and I have to share that my mom was one of seven children, three brothers, three sisters, and two out of three of her sisters actually had eating disorders. Definitely weren't defined, diagnosed, but definitely struggled with eating disorders. My dad has one sister, and she as well struggled with an eating disorder. So to say that I was genetically screwed is an understatement.
Yep,
Um,
no question.
but I also have to share too that genetics doesn't necessarily determine that it's going to happen. I just had all of those other parts of that perfect storm that came together. I've struggled with anxiety for as long as I can remember. I actually don't remember a time in my life where I didn't struggle with anxiety. I was always that shy kid that always hid behind my parents' legs and never felt good enough. Was definitely that people pleaser. Everything was black or white, all or nothing.
All of the temperamental characteristics.
All the temperamental
Yeah.
characteristics. And then my environmental trigger pull was I was a ballet dancer. So it was sort of like the perfect storm becomes the perfect storm. And my trigger pull was actually when I was about 11 and a half years old. I had just come back from spending the summers at School of American Ballet in New York. And I was in a class of girls that were a little bit older than I, and we all had this opportunity to audition to dance with the company. And one of the focus parts when they shared with us that we had this immense opportunity was we all need you to lose weight before the audition. Now, I know that they weren't talking to me. At least I don't think they were talking to me. I was very young. I was prepubescent. But I wanted it so hard. I had that, that athlete, like you go for it, you do it. It doesn't matter how. And I really had no idea. Like I really had no idea how to approach it. I just had no idea. All I knew was from the information that I consumed from the media, which was Cosmopolitan and Glamour magazine. And at that point, maybe 17 at the time, at that point in our history, that was when everything was fat free. Like everybody went on the fat free like bus. And so I remember getting picked up from my dance studio and looking at my mom and saying, I'm going to start eating healthy. I'm going to go on a healthy food diet. And I have to share that my mom was so excited because, if here's an 11-and-a-half-year-old who hates vegetables and fruits. She wants to eat fruits and vegetables. That's awesome, right? Like nobody could have, expected my trajectory or my journey, right? So I started watching what I ate, as far as being a little bit healthier. And there was a lot of pressure from my dance studio. You guys remember, you have to lose weight for this audition. You have to, really focus. The time came for my audition and I was the only one not picked out of the 15 members of my class. And they pulled me aside and they said, Joanna, the reason why you didn't get picked was not because you're not a good dancer. On the contrary, is just that you look so young compared to all the adults, right? All these professionals. And I have to share with you, that was the first time that I had that very messed up game of telephone that happened. Because what I heard was, it's obviously about the weight. They just don't want to tell me about it. And so I made this commitment to just do better. That next year I was going to do better. And I always say this whenever I speak in any opportunity is, for me, my experience with my eating disorder was the epitome of that quote, "The path to hell is filled with good intentions." I never looked out the window in like sunny, like Palm Beach, Florida and said, "Oh, it's a beautiful day. I think I'm going to have anorexia nervosa today." That never happens. And I don't think it really happens for anybody realistically. I just wanted to do better and be better. And I remember making the commitment to myself is I'm just going to do better. I'm going to eat healthier. I'm going to move my body a little bit more. And that's it. And as I'm sure many of you guys listening, and definitely, as a clinician, you've seen this, is that's when my very unhealthy relationship and experience with food and eating and my eating disorder began. And my eating disorder continued for more than 10 years. And I call myself a non-discriminatory eating disorder human. And what I mean by that is, you name it, I did it. And I probably made up a few along the way as well. And I will tell you that I had a very arduous experience. I came very close to losing my struggle several times. And I learned so much along the way, and there were so many opportunities where intervention could have happened. And in full disclosure, my experience was really what not only motivated me to start the Alliance, but really was the North Star of what we do at the Alliance. And so, literally, I mean, I graduated high school, I started dancing for a ballet company. I had relapsed at that time into my anorexia nervosa. I had been struggling with bulimia nervosa. And my parents and my doctors thought that obviously it was the ballet that was causing the eating disorder, like obviously. So they took ballet out of the equation. And in like, to be honest, I thought that my eating disorder would just go away, because I thought if I didn't have to put on pink tights and a black leotard and be judged for my body and look in that mirror, 24/7. And of course, we all know the eating disorder is never about the weight. It was never about the food. It was just how I maladaptively coped with my anxiety, my low self-esteem, my get out of life free card, if you will, the fear of doing the wrong thing, making the wrong decision, all of those things. Um, and so the one thing that made sense to me at the time when I stopped dancing was the only thing I know about, just as much as my dancing, is my eating disorder. And I know I'm not the first person that's ever experienced an eating disorder. And I know that I'm not the last one, unfortunately. So if I ever get better, I promise to do something. Because at that time, the only talk about eating disorders was Karen Carpenter. And I'm sure many of the people that are watching this might not know who Karen Carpenter is. And Tracy Gold, who was on that show Growing Pains.
Yeah.
There was no talk about recovery. There was no talk about life after eating disorders. And so I knew I had to do something. So I enrolled in my local university. And I started to do school in the same manner that I did my eating disorder. I took so many classes. I worked around the clock, because if I was doing all this work, I didn't have to be in my head. And it was just another way of coping unhealthfully, really. And I was certain that I wanted to become a psychologist that specialized in eating disorders. That was my track. I applied to PhD programs. I actually got into a few PhD programs. And my last semester of undergrad, when I was in this very, very stuck, just routine of binging and restricting, I knew that if I didn't change something, that I wouldn't be around. I had already come very close to losing my life during my struggle. And I had this moment that my fear of changing was just a little bit less than my desire to just see what was on the other side. And I had this moment where I called up my parents and I said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, because I was sick and tired. And so they said, what do you want to do? And I said, I think I need help. And I definitely don't want to portray it as like an after school special that like in that moment that it was, happily ever after, because it was totally the opposite of that. I ended up going to see a therapist who didn't specialize in the treatment of eating disorders. She was actually a substance use provider. And I walked into her office and I shared my story, and she looked at me and she said, Joanna, I'm so happy that you're here, but I have to tell you that you're going to be struggling with your eating disorder for the rest of your life. You'll learn how to manage it, but you'll still be struggling. In that moment, I was like, I mean, being 21 and being, having that, like, I just looked at her and I was like, well, then why am I here? I needed her to say, I didn't need her to say, I'm going to be cured, or that it will get completely better. I just needed her to say it will get better, because I just needed that flicker of hope to continue to get me moving forward. And she didn't. And so I left and I continued to engage in my behaviors, became very, very depressed, suicidal. And then luckily about a few months later, that flicker came back, that desire to try again. And I actually found an eating disorder clinician, and that's when my recovery started. It was definitely not linear. My perception of what my recovery should be was linear, but it was so messy. It was so messy. It was one step forward, three steps back, two steps forward, one step back. And that did not work with my perfectionistic black and white, personality. If I was going to be in recovery, I was going to do recovered 100%, or I was going to be back in my eating disorder.
And you were going to perform throughout the whole thing. Yeah. Exactly. Perform beautifully throughout the whole thing.
Exactly. And be the perfect patient. And so I got assessed for the highest level of care. Unfortunately, at that point, I was struggling with binge eating disorder, which wasn't its own diagnosis at the time. So managed care didn't pay for it. My parents didn't have the funds to pay for it out of pocket. So I did a combination of IOP and PHP, and I basically like ping ponged back and forth. Um, and I will tell you that I fell down all the time. I fell down all the time. I tripped all the time, but it wasn't so much about the tripping and falling. It was about that moment after where I had this moment, right? It's probably the only time I really had control of the situation is what was my next step going to be? And as long as I picked myself up, dust myself off, and kept on moving forward, that's where I found my recovery. And so I started my recovery journey about 21 years ago. I consider myself recovered now. My eating disorder is no longer a part of my life. I know that some people don't feel comfortable prescribing to recovered. I really don't care what ending of the word recover someone chooses. I'm here to let whoever needs to hear this know that there is life beyond your eating disorder. I am in complete recovery. My eating disorder is no longer a part of my life. I mean, except for like I talk about it like 9 to 10 hours
A
a day.
lot because you're in the field.
Right, but it's not my struggle anymore. Now I have the gift, and I do consider it a gift to help other people on their journeys. So for me, circling back, as I started my recovery journey, I realized that my heart really wasn't in the one-on-one therapeutic process. It was talking to that seventh grade me who felt like I didn't deserve to take up space, or that I wasn't worthy of even the most basic of things, or that I was the exception to the rule when I wasn't the exception to the rule. So I called up my parents again. They started to get very iffy about phone calls from me. And I said, you know how I want to do the grad school thing? Well, I want to start a nonprofit. And this was in October of 2000. And they were like, oh, geez. Like literally, they were like, all right, well, what? And so I said, I need you guys to believe in me just to do this. And they were amazing. I actually took out a student loan that last semester of undergrad. I moved back home, and I founded the Alliance on October 15th, 2000. And this October will be 20 years.
20 years.
And it's just been a crazy ride and an amazing journey. And I will tell you that I get to live my passion every single day. So that's a little bit about my personal story about how it got me to starting the Alliance.
That is just, I've had goosebumps the whole time I've been listening to you speak. You tell your story so beautifully and with such authenticity and vulnerability. And, just, I think a few things stand out about your story to me. One is that, eating disorders come in all different shapes and sizes. And throughout an eating disorder lifetime, they manifest in many different ways. And so it reminds us how there are really common core mechanisms. There are foundational issues that really are transdiagnostic. They're across all eating disorders. All eating disorders share much more than they don't share.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's one thing. And, you're sharing your story about how you kind of move through different permutations. I have a feeling that's probably pretty validating for people who have had that similar experience.
Absolutely.
I think the other part about your story is just the messiness is so appreciated, and you're sharing that because, yeah, people with eating disorders tend to be have a lot of perfectionism.
Yep.
And, it's very, very hard to, so we're about halfway through with the meal portion. It's
Great.
really hard to allow that gray area that, even if you have a mess up, a mix up, a little lapse, it doesn't mean it's over, and I think that is a theme that comes up again and again
Mm-hmm.
in the treatment setting.
Mm-hmm.
Things have to be a little bit more gray, and the process is not linear. And then one other thing that you said I loved, I wrote it down, is I love how you frame when you'd have a tough moment, how you took control back by saying, okay, what's next? What can I do next? And in that moment to tap into something recovery oriented, something positive, something effective for you. So that no matter what, no matter how hard the moment might be, that you take that as an opportunity to restore a sense of mastery, and that you will do something next to help. And in that moment, it's that tricky moment for people where you really hope that your healthy voice can be louder than the eating disorder voice. So for example, someone who's struggling with binge eating disorder and they have a moment, and there might be a binge or something, a perceived mistake, something they experience as a mistake. And that's sometimes a moment to say, I'm going to be more restrictive, or I'm going to be really good tomorrow, or I'm going to do better. And in that moment, to recognize that and to sort of take control in that moment and say, no, that's the eating disorder language.
Absolutely.
I'm going to take control now. My healthy self is going to take control right now, and recognize that there's this kind of pull by the eating disorder to get into some extreme and engage in another behavior. But instead, let me think to what I'm learning that has been helpful for others, that could be helpful to me. And I'm going to try it a different way.
I love that. And I also just want to share with people and hold space for, it's really tough in those moments when you're like, what can I do in this moment? Because you're so in it. And sometimes it's really hard to see past that moment. And so for me, and for many of the people that I've had, the gift of walking next to them on their journeys to recovery is having a list, like this, like breakout, like, how, they have those mechanisms in some stores where it's like, break the glass in case of emergency. And like, so have that break the glass list, if you will, that when you're in it and you can't, sometimes you can't get to that fact, like what's that next step that I need to do? It's having things written, and it's an amazing opportunity to work on it with your treatment providers. Let's work on a list together. Let me utilize my recovery community. Like, what do you use in those moments? So I think having that opportunity to think ahead and having those resources at your hands are going to be so important for those moments. But, recognizing, all we can do is the next right thing. I say this jokingly, I have a 3.5-year-old child. So, Frozen 2 is everything. And when I went to go see the movie the first time in the movie theater, I was like, oh my gosh, Olaf went to eating disorder treatment because he's talking all about the next right thing. But it's very true.
So funny.
It really is the next right thing. And even for me, like I've even gotten away from even saying the next like right thing, because it makes it right and wrong, which is
there's almost a judgment in that. So evaluation.
I take it back to like the next healthful step is really how I try to reframe it, just to not put that negative connotation or that those exact. So
we say effective. What's going to be the next effective?
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. So, so it's really realizing that it's so difficult and it's so messy. And the one thing that I share with people all the time is remember that you're not recovering to utopia, you're recovering to real life. And life without an eating disorder is messy. So you have to give yourself grace that it's going to be messy. And then when you throw in something like we're all experiencing right now, it's just so much messier. So
I think that is so important. And that came up from Jenny Schaefer a couple of days ago. And that was something she really reinforced. I mean, we still, the human condition is suffering, is struggling. Recovery doesn't mean it's like roses and butterflies every day. And that real life is very hard for all of us. And so I think that's a really important thing to remember. But, coming out of a struggle like an eating disorder, what I'm finding about the people that I see recovered is that they have unbelievable resilience and an insight that is very unusual in the general population, and like an incredible skill set, kind of what you're referring to, an incredible skill set that helps well beyond the eating disorder. It helps with any kind of conflict or difficulty interpersonally. So there's so much you grow to really grow and develop from the experiences. And clearly that's what happened for you. So
yeah. And I also want to share too, and this has been a really interesting experience for me personally. My eating disorder is no longer it's not a part of my life at all anymore, but I still struggle with anxiety. And I was noticing at the beginning of all this, my anxiety was so incredibly activated, and I was really having a hard time pulling those tools that have worked for me for so long. I'm like, all right, I've used every tool in this toolbox and I got nothing, like sometimes they're not working. And I have to be honest and tell you that I had a few moments of almost like leaning into shame, because I'm like in the shoulds, the woulds, the black or white, like I should be able to effectively cope with anything that's getting thrown at me. and really allowing myself to be in that space of, this is a global pandemic. Like
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
husband, who is the most mentally healthy person I've ever met in my life. He's one of those like normal people that I like to talk about. Even he had like an episode of having like complete panic, had a complete panic attack. And I was like, oh, okay, so you're the calm one between us. But even, and that actually gave me the grace to be like, I'm doing the best I can. And I need to like give myself some space. And what else can I be doing? I need to be probably reaching out to, those floaties in my life that keep me up, and say, and be honest and keep myself accountable, because I will share with you, people ask me all the time, so what was it that helped you in your recovery? What was it that kept you in your recovery? And there's, as we all know, there's not one answer. There's not one specific.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I will very much share with you that accountability was a huge part of my recovery. And that was, you talk about vulnerable, like that was me, like in every sense of Brene Brown's work, like that was me totally leaning into vulnerability, because I was so used to being that, like, as you talked about at the beginning, that perfect human, perfect patient. When I finally started to make myself accountable and lean into my accountability, that's when my recovery actually happened. So I bring up accountability because, so much of the things that I've been getting asked lately is, well, how do we take care of ourselves during this time? And
Mhm.
that my answer to them is being accountable, showing up for you in your recovery, letting people know when you need support. And in all honesty is, the first person you reach out to might not be able to support you in this moment, because they're
Mhm.
probably going through their own stuff. But don't stop reaching out, continue to reach out, ask for what you want. And even if you don't feel comfortable, calling your friend from work, or someone else in your life to say, I really want to have a meal, I need to have a meal with someone because I need that accountability, reframing it to say, hey, you want to eat lunch together? I'm just like really lonely, and I think
Yeah.
that we could
Yeah.
schedule a time together to eat lunch. So even making them accountable without even them knowing that they're an
Yeah.
accountability person.
Yeah. So it's like kind of what I'm hearing is be as skillful as you can to get what you need. And that
Absolutely.
may look different ways at different times. It may sometimes be super
100%.
direct, like I'm really struggling, I need your help. And it may also be effective in the moment to sort of find a way of framing it that gets you what you need without you having to be as vulnerable or
Absolutely. And know that not everything is going to work for everybody, like that's really what like, again, like it's really amazing for those of us who have that negative voice, how we can turn anything into an opportunity to like throw mud on ourselves. It's like,
yeah,
well, this tool works for this person. Why is it not working for me? Because it's not one size fits all. So
yeah,
try something. If it doesn't work, move on to the next. Again, an amazing opportunity to write like a list of, these are some tools that I can use when I.
yeah, yeah. There's one other thing that came to mind as we were talking. The other part I think is very hard for certain temperaments as well, is just like sitting with discomfort and
Mhm.
tolerating. So one of the things that I've noticed, I mean, like anyone, I've had such bad moments through this whole crisis. And sometimes I just have to remind myself, I feel crappy and that's just going to be the way I'm going to feel. And I might not feel better. And, kind of, it's been interesting for me to explore crappiness and look at it, because one of the things I noticed recently is sometimes I can feel really crappy at the end of the day. And there's something about just going to bed and getting up in the next morning that I wake up feeling different. And so I think remembering, number one, that feelings aren't going to hurt you, like feeling extremely anxious or fearful or panicky, it won't hurt you. And to remember that it does pass without question. Emotions they're like waves, and we're going to talk about that today after the meal. But they are waves, and they rise and they peak and they subside. And so, just leaning into the discomfort. It doesn't mean I think perfectionists and people who have that temperament, they're fixers and they want to kind of fix what's not right. And at times there are skills we can use to feel better, but at times the most skillful thing is just acceptance of the
Yep.
experience
Yep.
and letting it ride out.
So, I mean, it's so true. Like for me, there's some moments that all I do is watch really bad Bravo television, or,
Yeah,
which
I
is
love it.
the
Yes.
best. Um,
Yeah.
or go for a walk, and again, it's really taking a look at the why, like the intention behind why I want to
Yeah.
go for a
Yeah.
walk is I just want to get out and breathe some fresh air and be in the sunlight. And so I think it's also realizing that, and I've watched everything on Disney Plus in the last 3.5 weeks. But one of my favorite movies of all time is that Disney movie Inside Out. And I think you
Yeah.
just
That's a
you
great.
just talked about it so beautifully, is like conflicting and coexisting emotions at the same time. And just because we have sadness, and just because we have anger, which God forbid any of us feel angry, right? Because that's definitely not
Right.
a feeling that we talk about or let
Yeah.
ourselves experience.
Yeah.
And that's okay, and it'll pass. And that's really like sort of my mantra is, we as a collective, we can get through anything together, and there will be another side of this. And for me, what I've been telling people everywhere is, when we're able to go out again, like, if you do engage in your eating disorder, where will you be in that moment?
Mm.
So when we're done, you talk about missing school, missing your friends, missing all of this. And if you start engaging in your eating disorder, where will you be when, like, the ban is lifted? Like,
Right.
you
Yeah.
want to be able to be healthy. You want to be able to experience those things, because you deserve that. Despite what the crappy committee between your ears is saying, you
Yeah.
deserve to experience
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
it's just holding tight, knowing that, if you need to rest, like, I don't know about you, but I have found myself physically more tired than I
Yeah.
have in a very long time. And I'm like, all right, not doing that like that much. Like, what's going on? It's because this is a heavy burden on all of us.
Yeah.
So it's really accepting that this is just really difficult time, and we're going to get through it.
Yeah. So well said, Joanna. Now, I realize I kind of messed up the timer today.
That's okay.
So I think we've been at 30 minutes for the meal, and I'm sorry about that. I missed the 5-minute warning. I think I was found the conversation very compelling. So we're going to take a second here and just quickly check in. So usually after a meal, we might check in on very briefly on how we're feeling, actually, because we work hard on moving on from the meal. So what we're going to do is, I have a couple more questions for Joanna that I'd like to ask, and then I'm going to leave a little time to teach a skill. So right now, there may be feelings about the meal that are coming up for you. And one of the best tools we use when we're having a lot of feelings about eating is distraction. So I'm going to turn back to Joanna and ask you if you could share. I mean, you're heading up an organization that is totally focused on supporting people with eating disorders and people who know people with eating disorders. So can you share with us a little bit about resources right now and what is available out there to help people,
Sure.
in
Absolutely.
particular now in this crisis that we're all
Yeah.
living together?
Yeah. So as I shared earlier, the Alliance, our focus, our mission is really broken up into three different tiers. First and foremost is our educating frontline responders, so doctors, nurses, dentists, clinicians, and dietitians that aren't given the opportunity to be educated about eating disorders. So we do trainings in medical schools and hospital systems, um, you know, you name it, like, we're there, and we give them enough information to just identify, recognize, and refer eating disorders, not to make them specialists, because less than 20% of our healthcare providers are given any opportunity about eating disorders. And with 1 in 10 Americans that will experience an eating disorder in their lifetime, we deserve better. And
Yeah.
so that's really our first component. Our second component is we have the largest, I would say, comprehensive and inclusive referral database system in the country for all levels of care. So if anybody out there is looking for any levels of care, it's findedhelp.com. It's a very evergreen website, as well as we have people on staff here that can help with referrals to care. And our third component is our support component, which I'm going to talk about specifically. Is so we have 20 free clinician-led support groups weekly across the country. So we have them in Florida, New York, New Jersey, Texas, Louisiana, Indiana. We have them across the country, and we're on path to open up more. And we hold these groups weekly, and we see so much growth in these groups, the sense of community, the sense of oneness together, an opportunity where people speak your language, or they share things that you may be thinking but don't know how to share, want to share. Um, and so when, when the virus really sort of infiltrated our lives and we knew that we couldn't hold our in-person support groups anymore, it was devastating to us because, I mean, last year alone, more than 5,000 people came to our group. So we know how much people depend on these groups. We very quickly turned to an online platform. So we now offer 2 free weekly check-in groups, one on Monday night at 7:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and one on Saturday morning at 11:00 Eastern Standard Time for individuals that are personally experiencing eating disorders. And then we have one on Wednesday evenings at 7:00 Eastern Standard Times for loved ones of individuals that are experiencing eating disorders. And they've been phenomenal and amazing. And I feel so honestly privileged to be one of the facilitators of those groups. There's always 2 licensed clinicians in all of the groups that we do, because we do believe in the clinician-led model. Oversight with definitely peer driven. But we really wanted to find a way to support people during this time. So we switched to our online model, as well as we've been offering 2 to 3 Facebook Lives, Instagram Lives, topic specifics every week as well. And last, I mean, our team at the Alliance, and I have to share, we have the most amazing team. I'm so blessed and lucky to work with them. They're working around the clock to keep up with even like residential or inpatient treatment centers, like what they're doing as far as, are they still accepting patients? What IOP and PHPs are doing virtual versus in person. So we're here to support in every sense of the way, just to help you navigate these really uncertain times.
So if somebody has a particular insurance and they're looking for a provider who accepts their insurance, you can help with that? Or
Absolutely.
if somebody's looking for a low fee treatment, you have resources or research protocols or things like that that you can refer to, Medicaid,
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So that was very important to us when we started building our referral mechanism, is to know, I mean, I think there's over like 1,000 different insurances. The list goes on, like even in our database. So if you're, living in Palm Beach and have like, Aetna insurance and are struggling with anorexia nervosa, and you also have a co-occurrence of substance use, we can help you find a referral for that. So call us. And it's really important for me to share, because I really take a lot of pride in it, is there's no cost for clinicians to be listed or treatment centers to be listed. We want to try to make it as unbiased as possible. And there's no advertisements on the site. There's no advertisements, like obviously when people call, we really want to do best fit and most effective fit, because we want to really shorten the gap between people that are struggling and get them into the providers and treatment centers of those that can help. Because especially right now, we need to get people access to care. And it's been so beautiful, and I'm so grateful. And this is, as I was saying earlier, that people like you are doing what you're doing, is our community has really stepped up during this time. And I have to say that it's being seen and it's being very much appreciated.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Johanna. So I'm gonna move on to teach a couple skills, and you can finish your lunch if you'd like.
Thank you.
So the first thing I'm just going to review is a nice breathing exercise, and I'm sure all of you have heard about how helpful breathing can be. One thing I want to say about deep breathing and using breathing as a way to kind of calm yourself or relax yourself, it's really helpful if you can practice at times when you're not feeling super activated. Because just like any muscle, you're kind of getting some muscle memory and practice, and breathing is kind of the same thing. It's really great if you can practice it a couple of times a day. The nice thing is that it's almost like a pill in your pocket. Nobody can even tell if you're working on it. It's there with you anywhere you are. So it's a really nice, discreet strategy to use. And it's a great one to use going into a meal or after a meal. And there are 2 that I really like, because personally, sometimes when I think too much about my breathing, I actually start getting like out of breath. It sort of makes me anxious or something. So these are two exercises that I like. And you can even use a piece of paper and pencil to do them. So the first one is the triangle exercise. And on a piece of paper, you could even draw a picture of a triangle. And as you go up the first side, you're taking a slow breath in for about 3 or 4 seconds. And then as you're going down the other side, you're just holding your breath for 3 or 4 seconds. And then as you go along the bottom, you're breathing out. And I think it helps to kind of you kind of have to coordinate yourself a little bit, and it distracts you just enough that it can actually pull you in and be really effective. So again, even with a pencil or your finger or just in your mind, breathing in up the side of the triangle, holding it for a few seconds down the side, and then letting the breath out. And then practicing that maybe 3 or 4 times. The next one is called Crazy 8 because it's not crazy making, it's just the opposite. And you kind of imagine that you have a little 8 that's on its side. And you start at the middle, and then you breathe in as you circle to one side. Then you kind of hold it for a second or two, and then you breathe out around the other side. And there's, something somewhat meditative about kind of moving your way around the 8. And again, it's distracting. It involves your visual, you're looking at it, experiencing it physically, and even a tactile sensation if you decide you want to copy the pattern with a pen or pencil. Mm-hmm. So I definitely would recommend practicing that before meals, after meals, any time of the day that you feel that you need some calming, because the research really does show us that when you slow your breath, you're actually slowing your heart rate down a little bit and soothing your muscles and relaxing your muscles. The other thing I want to share, and this relates a bit to what we were talking about earlier, relates to riding out feelings. And many of you have probably heard of this term before, but I think it's worth reinforcing that it's called urge surfing, and it's based on the fact that the way that feelings work through our system is that they kind of rise like a wave would, in that you begin at a baseline, and then whatever emotion you're feeling begins to rise. And then at a certain point, it does peak. It doesn't go on infinitely, no matter how intense a feeling, and it can be super, super intense, the feeling. But at some point, it does peak. It reaches that higher level, and then it might crest and sort of begin to fall. And so we talk a lot about riding the wave, because what we know through research is that if you have an urge, or if you have any particular unpleasant feeling, it is not going to be sustained for a very long time. If you allow yourself to work through it, the urge will actually decrease, or the feeling will actually decrease. So it's just another strategy to use. Some people will say, if they're having an urge to use a behavior after a meal or at any time of the day, really allowing yourself to surf that wave and let the feeling kind of work itself out, because it without question will eventually. And sometimes what we'll do is we'll even set a timer and say, can you try to ride the wave for 5 minutes or 3 minutes or 7 minutes? And what we usually find when people practice riding the wave is that they get better at it. And over time, you get to ride it a little bit longer, so that you actually really do gain confidence in the fact that your feelings kind of come and go, and that you can get through them.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah. Did you ever have that one? Did you ever try that one? Or
oh, absolutely. I mean, I think like the wave, I mean, at some point, like I don't have any tattoos, but I think if I ever were to, it would be a wave. I have to say that, because I have to tell you, so much of even lately, I just keep on imagining that wave. Like it's going to get better. Even if I have to white knuckle it in this moment, it will get better. And it always does. And I love that. I really love that triangle like analogy, because I mean that activity, I'm so going to do that. Absolutely going to do that. I love that. But it's just when you're in it, right? Like you feel like it's never going to end. And that really, and it's in that moment where you're like, I need to peace out right now. I need to do X, Y, and Z behavior because I can't tolerate it. When in fact, you may not know how close to, the crescent you really are. So give yourself even that opportunity to just stay in it just a little bit longer. And for me, what I considered wins were, hey, if I like sat in it for like an extra minute than I used to, that was a win. And, I it's hard for me. Like my favorite color now is gray on purpose because I'm like, I was lived in the black and white for so long. And, I try to live my life in what I call like the middle drawer, like, not
Yeah.
top drawer, bottom drawer, like the middle drawer. And like, for me, these like little incremental steps of I'm sitting in my emotion just a little bit longer, was really super helpful. So I really love that imagery of the wave.
Thank you, Joanna. It's been so nice talking to you,
Thanks so
Joanna Kandel from the Alliance for Eating Disorder Awareness. And I wish you health and as much sanity as possible during these times. And
much.
thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. I hope you all have